Hashideli, Geshe, Hashideli, Katrina, and welcome everybody. So again, I would like to remind us that you can use the chat box for questions. We will look through them and send them to Geshe. Please don't use the chat box for other communications, just for questions. If you wish to follow our recitation, please go on our event listing page on our website. You can download the PDF. And I have another announcement. Katrina, you don't need to translate that. We received some questions how to make offerings to express gratitude to Geshe-la's teaching and Katrina's excellent translation work. That's great. You can make offerings online or by check. The way to do that is on the Abbey website. Click on the donation button. Please let us know how you like to divide the donation to Geshe-la, Katrina, and the Abbey. And we will distribute the donations accordingly. So just a heads up, there are special days coming up. March 3 is Tibetan Losar, and on March 18 is the Miracle Day. And these are auspicious days and very meritorious to make offerings. And actually, the whole 15 days before the Day of Miracle is also very meritorious to make offerings. So you're welcome to join us there. So we will start with the recitations now.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one God to bliss, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, and I bow. With pure bodies, formed supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms, unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings, the holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, for land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offer to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayame. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha by the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Kange tukje nye sonne tambe chune kange tukje nye sonne tawa tamje pangbe chir tambe chune tuanche ba kodam de la cha cha ro oh ya ta simje tamje ge tuan tup tum genge wa kyen ko se yende kun denje sanje je ko ma chi chene ja to ba cha de che de te tolje je kibu chongo dan jing da chembe lamje sembanam le ya Tobache, Sambache, Gombacha, etc. And it's training in Sambe. Chanju is Simja Tamjek Tonto. Don't to get it Tonto. Don't to take it shooting again Samsang. Guno Chanju Sim. Mata Chema set on the Samba shoes. Oh, this.
So here we should set a motivation thinking that I will, by whatever means, attain this state of Buddhahood in which I have eliminated all faults and gained all good qualities in order to be able to fully benefit all sentient beings. And thereby, in order to do that, I need to know the stages by which to attain such a state. So I'm going to listen here to the Dharma, these stages by which I am able to, for the sake of all sentient beings, attain that perfect state of Buddhahood. So with that kind of bodhicitta motivation, at the very least, a kind of contrived bodhicitta motivation, we should listen to these teachings.
Oh, yeah, then kasi Jawati ba Jawati chik rangi to do it labda.
Lordujik, ani tangyom gombe kapsu 아니 탕보 바르마치클라 타고라와 아니 디 탕용 곰베 갑수 타 남파 컨드레스 장고레 카레레세나 탕보 바르마치클라 타고레와 아니 디 젤라 자셰 탕자 란용고레와 이네 미치기 오 간소기 ngangi rangshingi zashela gawa tang yiongi namba di mepa soyarebes tangyong gombe kapsu ani mingnam khandres jangore mikpa khandres jangore
뭐야 뭐 다시 하고 잡히면서 다 땅님 공부해라 Oh, that is, do that. Tanyum Kongore, Tanyum Kongde, Tambo Sosoge, Pamanjela Sogba, Tezul Komgiora. Oh, take comne, and a teach Elia, and a Sosoge Niende, Tezu com, and I'm used also drawn ditches at Tezu.com. Tene Parma de la Comgora. Parma said Rage Casanya, member Chitang Metzolia. Rage Pamadan Yadina Shingi Pasam Yomeg Comgoyara. Teach Elia and a tar Susumega Suyone Telecom Gura. Nyomede Tambu Sosu Pama Nyede Cherwa. Te so Nangshin Jenny Shanda. Parmesum Jet to Kawangama. Rala Pen talk about sending Nashi Cherry some Tende Sam Tangura. And it is Chibade Chasona. And it Tanda Sosu Mega Sachuna, Konzo Tanda Sosu Mega Chamado Kawangama Namso. Sende Pama Nashingi. Yende Nashi Pe Mambo Pen Toyore. Sam Gurua. Tende Tanda Nazo Semnalia. Sosu Nyende, Parmas, Tras, Shukchambu, Kaba Chambu Shojidoa, Kumanyambajidoa, or Tita Nyambachigiara. Nyame Tondalia, Tambu Sosu Nyende Yasatine Samluta, and Etinepa, Parma Samluta, Tine, Tali Samlutan Jeta, Nirin Chagdan, Shukchambu Yoba, the Tospa Nyame Tonda Samlutangiora. Tene?
So here, I'm sorry I didn't say the question in English, and I'm not sure if I fully got it across. But what what I'm asking about is when one is meditating on equanimity. And here in the text, we had the sort of the order where one goes through looking at those that are sort of, people we don't know, don't have any kind of connection with, and then those that are our friends and relatives and so forth. And so the question was regarding the kind of aspect that this takes on, because it seems as though maybe someone that if you start with someone that you are not as close with, and then you move on to those that are your friends and relatives, it's almost like you're trying to eliminate the kind of sort of feeling of closeness and intimacy that you have with those that are your friends and relatives. Now here in Geshe-la's response, he actually said that we could begin with those sort of people that we consider to be our friends and relatives. And the idea, the point that we are trying to accomplish in terms of meditating on equanimity is to level out that kind of natural sort of attachment to some and aversion to others that we have. So if we even begin with those that we consider loved ones and friends and relatives, we recognize then moving on to those that we don't know, that their wish for happiness and their sort of the kindness and harm that they have showed us is all the same. Although we have the sort of feeling of closeness to some in this life, it's not as though those that we don't know haven't shown us kindness and so forth. And then we move on to those that we consider to be our enemies and make them equal in this way of recognizing that they have equally benefited us and equally harmed us. And so the sort of idea behind engaging in equanimity is to level out that kind of attachment that we feel towards some and sort of hatred that we feel toward others. Mare, nganso namgyungi zashela ta gawa yore rwa. Ani sem nyomdu ta di gawa tang yongi jampa drabo di mepa soyare bes. Nganso gi zashela.
Kasha?
Tanyong gomgurwage. Tanyong gomgurwala sosu zashela namgyu gawa da zewa yarwa.
Kyo?
Di meba soyare bes. Sosu de kasa de nyela de chamba dan zewa yungu de meba soyare shani chikpa soyare bes. Di khande res.
Oh, di marida. Di tanda chezange semba pama da nyendela sokbala tanyum she. Ta di nangshin shenda su sokura. Tanda tare parma re di nangshin pama da nyendela tsaw meba che segiyo mara. Tanda pama nyendela tsaw yoba nangshin segiyora. O teta nyamba, ane parma to so kyawa ngama namso chendi pama nangshin chayo resi. Konzo tanda chendi pama nyendela sokbala tawa nangshin che ta nyebu tagu resi giyora. Pa nyam gurwa, tanda pama nyendela tsaw yoba di nangshin pajo de nyamba sokura. Pajo de tsaw meba da tratu tu nangshin pa nyamba pa su segiyo mara. Tangbo sosu pama nyendela sokba che. Tezu nangshin kyawa ngama parme simje tu chayo resi. Teyende kozo parma de ngan jawa me samsa ta ringbu shaya. Sosu nyende chung chung chi ta nyebu shaya o te chigiyo mara songwara. Ani parma de la nyam so na ani ta to ta tanda rang ta jeba ma do. Kyo nga ma no so nyen chen na chen di phama na shi pe pha to yo res. Tanda ko di ba di ra ji ko ta jeba ra ta di rong ma re sam. Te a ko ta nye bu che pha ta go ra. O ti se bu che go ra. Ti to ba yong ko nam gyu. Kar se de ta nyum se de ne ta ta parma ta de to ra ge family la so ba tha nye sa de ta ta 네 parme sumjana jpa nyam gore se cheba sogore chawa chego mare se kodugdo ti kujiyo mara tanda tezola chawa yeba nan shin se ane parma tezola tende chetop gore tene tata zola tende chetop re pa chayera nyam sudu tanda sozo pama nyentela ene ta nyebo yeba nan shi shandal pa nyamba che tina shi ta nyebo so se yara ato pajo de ta ringbore mega se re tina shin dezo pa mega che chawa meba su se mara
다 슝디게 갑수 당보 다 바르메 촉네 참고와
그래서
아니 콘속의 삼수 디 바르메 낭신 다 니ering 메바라보 타고레스 저와
당고 순데 갈라 타뇽 곰데 갈라 당고 파말 곰데니 잘 곰세
어디와
디인들 파말 곰데 갈라 남지 소스게 니엔데 요바나 신게 저와 당티 참바들려고 말아 디인들 갈라 디 파말 곰바나 신 자다 망갈레 저와 메바로 고미지 고이서
저 매바 좋으셔
파말 남지 저게 요 말아
좋아
파만이 가서 쇼나라 파만이 잠지 곰세
어디래
리인들 콘수 가르코데스나 파말 저 메바나 신 강갈레
어디래 어디 말이야
디 말에
아무 소소 파마 년제를 고매야 돼봐 녀사진에 공부해 봤더니 пар마로 공부해 봐 파마 년제를 저 여반나 타 예보 여반나 시 콘수 배 타는 부처 마샤 콘수의 식과를 경험만 삼을 당시 최대 지구 삼을 당요 말아 저 삼을 당데 랑데 자신부 림부 소거래 경험마 장매방아 여러 삼단다 간사 최대 개발도 집에 다시기라 그 말을 마도 경험마 균데 여러와 겨와 심한 균데만 줘야와 어디 삼을 당에는 나 삼도 나 경험마 가르쳐래 팅아마 가르쳐서 망부도와 팅아마 년제 여래 단지 매ብ차스고쇼
나 디레 So here we should actually there's some other noise. I don't know if anyone else is hearing that. Do you all hear that? Okay.
그것도 왜
some disconnection
Okay, so here, when we are meditating on this kind of equanimity, we should understand that it's not trying to like equalize all of our feelings toward other beings, toward what we normally feel towards like those we don't know and our enemies and so forth, right? So we are trying to, in developing equanimity, develop this kind of closeness, a loving kindness toward all sentient beings. So we recognize that equally. So those here in the text, it seems to take those that have acted as like have been our sort of that we don't know, we haven't been close to. But really, the way Geshe-la is talking about it, we should begin with this kind of meditation on our friends and relatives. And it's that sort of feeling of like closeness and intimacy and recognizing that they've acted in a way that is kind towards us, that they have benefited us. That's the kind of feeling of recognizing all sentient beings as having acted as our mothers and fathers that we should try to extend to all sentient beings equally. Because we need to really, it's not right to sort of hold someone as our enemy based upon something they did to us in just this life. We don't really have the proper kind of long-term thinking. Here we recognize that just this one life is a very short period, and there is a continuity of, you know, the self that we have now. There's a continuity that goes into previous lives and a continuity that will go forward into future lives. And so in terms of our relationship with others, they have acted kindly towards us in the past. We need to have this kind of more far-sighted understanding, a long-term kind of understanding that all sentient beings have had that sort of special, intimate closeness and beneficial relationship to us. And that's the kind of way in which we want to equalize that toward all sentient beings. It's not like trying to equally see everyone as your enemy or equally see them as sort of being indifferent toward them.
Oh, that Tanyum City Tunda. Sende Nende Rangi Zawa Yosachi Tandangazu Samlenalia, Kashel Ta Nibo, Kashelia Nawa Mengen, Kashel Traje Ta Rimbu Mambudua. The members that Sende Soso Nyesa Tosolia Chamja Gasu Sam Nibo Yuvananshi. The Shanda Gangala Pate and Yamba Surs or a Tanyum City Sigura. Sende Pama Nendela Sobala Chamji Yuvan Zawa Yota Yabudua. Jebadua, or didn't ship her Jebas tender, Kashel Casa, Megasa, tender, draw, make tender, some Matasura. Goddess and a social Gama Chidu, and a social Gamalia, Tayo Marwa. Teach people one machine, but Mother Conzo said, D, near dinner, Seche or Residora. So then you made the Terida, Tanyum Sedusa. Said they rang a tiny boys and I think Shandaka tiny boche, Panyam Gores, Cares, Gal Tomayoma, Sendi Chibumares, Gawangama, your Tinga, my Tendesam Tangora. This one.
So the ones that we love in this life, I mean, normally we are sort of distinguishing into these categories, that those that we're indifferent towards, those that we see as enemies, and those that we have a kind of love and affection for in this life. And the kind of closeness that we feel toward those that are our relatives and friends and family, that's the kind of love and closeness that we are trying to develop for all sentient beings. So looking at the fact that we have previous lives, life before life before life, and there's no sort of beginning to that. There's no being that hasn't acted in that capacity as our loving friend and family. And so therefore we can extend out this closeness by extending beyond this life to recognize that we should view those that we normally view as enemies or as with indifference as being close to us in the way that we feel close to those that are our relatives and friends and loved ones in this life. Digido.
Yeah, anybody got it.
아니 니바디 돌들지 셰고레 카레르스나 치당 nganso arila nganso ki chapsi ta shengo shukchembo yorewa kyare mangbo kyabki ores 아니 digin nangne jampa dang ningje dang gom kyabia kandres jangores ta netsul digi nang Chapsi ta shengo shukchambo yorawa arila mixe arila ani di digi nanglola ta samsam ningje gomya dan di ganga kale kakodu ani kirangi kalob nangya yubes chiwa dire
Sidun nyota yore tele kale yore sere tekol sesere ana
Titanda Arinalo Chapsiki, sitting Chukenchen, me Penjiporala, Tingi down, Shoshian down,
oh yora
Mambo Yorasa, Tadinalo Chamba down, Sewa down, Tanyan Bonds to Handes, Jan or Telegangi and Kalopchananas.
Nale Candice Mabs or Severa.
Tadinalo Titanda Casan, Netan, the Kuyu Netan, the Yakoyomara, Chiloni. Choshian down, Shango down, Chapsik on the Mambo Yorasa.
Oh, yeah.
Mistake Bomja and Chambago, the Zero, and then they don't tell it any Genji Kalopchananas.
Oh, there. Oh, the touch of seeing Yota Seteta Takanga Yoda. Nami in Yota Yoda, Yendin Yota Yoda, Netin, Lungbel Yota Yoda, Zabulin Yota Yoda. Oh, there. That is Saba. Did Yota do some social sort of chicken danger? Any demon do something called Saba Togua. Attacarene Yungurit in the manner Yabore some social money, but they never share. In Shanda to the pa, Chagdan, the Nundri and Nundri to the pa, Shina some sage. She was Guji some sage, consolate so come the Yaga, Hamago, some. Console nature Hamago, Mombe wanted to go there. 차당의 샤와도 두고 생각하죠. 디나리와 가르쳐를 준주나라. 투바 녀모 잘세기 녀모 당지 강사매 송고도 투바 녀모 잘세기 녀모 당지 강사매세. 아코 하고요마 가시는 메시베와 그래. 가시는 차당과 그 다시 하고신도 투비어와 어디 되자고 때 가서다. 그 저기 메시바도 몽바도 제버려서 야 가시 차당게 하고신도 되잖아. 그 차당과 그 제기어래서 아니 근데 저저 그 차당은 시에다 몽바도 시에 그 시와 매버 소에 소소거네 그저 영역 탑시 제야와 마도 강사들 건조 야보 말에서 때 야보에서 잘 생겨요 말와 투바 녀모 잘시기 녀모 당지 강사 미제라 제 나라도 빼빼 자는 속도 파마도 제리아 아니 부 야보 시에서 아니 코셈 툭 semba kibu 매버차 아니 암지 멤버도 돌래 코 자르 잡거와 자르 잡도 암지 콘도 사가 말에 타고 semba 때요 말에 타고 semba 야보지 시와 컨데 서고나 삼자 쟁기 마도 코 야보 민도상 콜 콘도 사가 말와 코라와 매버치로 티네시 삼을 당고도 코 착당 샤완도 도아래 코 미시바 내주 하고요 말에삼 타코 미시바디 파세야다 딜이야 소소문에 몰람자 탑시지에 있는 거 탑시지에 뭐 탑시지에만 몰람자 대체마도 강사들을 단지주 매삼 닝제삼 어든지 삼 단주라 남산 잘 매 마찬가지야 그때 양내에 삼다 양내에 삼다는데 자자도라 저기도 왜 원래 되시려면
So we have a second question, and I apologize again for not stating the question but prior to giving it to Geshe-la. So the question is, I'm trying to maintain good practice of meditation, mindfulness, and compassion. This is sometimes difficult here in the US with politics pushing hate and division. So any advice? So that's kind of a large question, but we should recognize that there are all kinds of difficulties within the world, difficulties in terms of the political level, the sort of interpersonal difficulties that we can have in our family and in our communities. And so we can recognize those sort of difficulties and troubles, but sort of getting upset by it is not going to really do anything to benefit us. So here we should recognize that those that are, say, acting with hate and the kind of divisiveness are really doing so out of being under the control of their afflictive emotions, out of a kind of state of ignorance and delusion. And so even in the case where somebody may recognize that, say, they are under the control of hatred and they act in that way, it's still sort of inappropriate for us to label people as enemies just on the basis of that. So as Shantideva has said in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the real enemy is not the person, but rather the kind of affliction motivating them. So in order to eliminate those kinds of attitudes, we should recognize that the real enemy or the real problem are those attitudes of hatred and attachment and ignorance and so forth. And so we should make an effort, if we can, to help them eliminate those kinds of attitudes. Or if we're not able to actually affect in a situation, make a kind of prayer or an aspiration that they might be freed from those sort of afflictions. And so having compassion for other people is the best way to sort of deal with this situation. Like, for example, if you have, say, a person who is really mentally disturbed and they go to a doctor and maybe they're fighting with the doctor, maybe they're sort of combative, the doctor is not going to get angry at that patient. They're going to investigate, well, what's going on here? How can I benefit them and help them? And so too, it should be with someone that we see that is sort of under the control of their afflictions and acting in that way. It does nothing for us to label them as an enemy or treat them in that way, but really that should increase our compassion and sort of our prayers, our aspirations to get rid of those kinds of afflictions from driving us and others. Thank you so
and Pena Michi Samba Truce, Roa. Never to change Samba Truce, Amji to Zulu, Manju, and Amji to Zulu, Coach, Captain, the Chigate, member to the Amji to the Kondu Sagmarese, Kota Sem to the Orete, Naza the condition with some sure chigri mato, call Kondu Sagmarese Yodo. O Tinashi, Tobasanji from the Tuje to the Mishibe Mongba, Chaktan, Tish, and want to son the Shiba and Shin to Menemer Chadiora. Narazu Jita Yondal and Yabasiti, Cotes the Matevice, Sos the Masevice, Kanjumanju Chen and Yabaris Achira. Tite Yabashira Maresera. One Tane Chaktan, the Shawan to son and Eche, Narazu Dua, Mibubra Mabuse, or the Kari de Cheshua. Tingone Shiba and Shitu Menebe Yaban Shiresora. The Chanju and Jiden and Saya Tonya the Chi, doesn't young with the Yabasere, Tinyabas came Marinaba Chunjura, Shidaki Medua. Tile Janganzu Chakdan, Shawan to son, and Chichel teacher, Simjan Bubra Mabuse, Samutangidua. Then one Shiba and Shitu Menebasira. Some day, Nambu some Chiorati, and Shitu Manebaja, Condus, Shivaja, Pejitini, and to Nambu. Tu Shusera, Nambu, and to Simjan, never changing the two in a Chiosera, two. That's Simjan, two, never change a two, and that's the women missing around to do Chato Chigdoa. Zambul Koran Mab Sudo Chigdoa, Chichilia, Condus, Tilichagodoa. Just of course, Sanjay Chumden, the Sungura, take Uncle Koran, the Shiva, and Shindu Meneban Shede. Call it Sawa Kongure. The Mab so the Karis, Tarzan, the Karis, Yamu, the Mishiba Momba, the Target. Number Sanjay Balatrani Mato Yomare. Yombe Tata, Mishiba Mombe Trasi, Chief the Chakdan Soba, Kameka, teach Rachik and Arab Sangme. City Mishine to Hamagon, Momba. Tame Balatatu, Evan, Choshan, Chemirik Ballet, Ran Tawan, the way to the Madu, Shet, Tawan Doja, Tungeki Jutu, Tunge Mendoja, Tunge Jutu, so hollow on the north as Doa. O Tilia Teneco Tarsi, Yomoba, the Shijeti, but Trani Doa, Yomo Betrada, Mishiba Momba, Shijeti, but Trani Yore. Simjan Tartaya Yomar, Chabat Ninja Combo Yara. O Tigis Shana,
So here, the Buddha, the sage, the Buddha has said that we encounter many kinds of difficulties. Like again, if we have someone who's like mentally disturbed and a doctor is trying to treat them, that doctor is not going to get angry with that patient, but rather they're going to try to figure out, well, what is afflicting them? What is harming them? And so in this world, we have those that sort of in a worldly sense are called crazy, but the real sort of actual crazy people are those that are under the control of their afflictive emotions, and out of those afflictions like turn around and harm others. So the people that we sort of in a worldly sense call crazy are very small, but those of us who are under the control of our afflictive emotions, our anger and our hatred and our desire and so forth, although that doesn't like abide in the nature of the mind, that's the real sort of kind of being crazy. So when we look at those that are afflicted by their various attachment and anger and so forth, we don't blame the sort of person. We don't look at it as though it's an intrinsic fault of that person, but rather those afflictions are the real enemies. So within Buddhism, there are really just two enemies, two prime enemies, our attachment and hatred and so forth, our afflictive obscurations, as well as that ignorance, that lack of knowledge, wherein we are holding things and misperceiving them, our obscuration to knowledge. So when we hold there to be some kind of a self when there isn't actually, or we hold things as being permanent when they are not, when we hold our suffering as being happiness and so forth, or are ignorant about the causes of those sufferings, there are really just those two enemies, our two obscurations, our afflictive obscurations and the obscurations to knowledge. But there's no need to ever see the person as an enemy.
Oh yeah, more to the Takar section. Oh dear. Me Chatache sitting in that Jamaica shitted Takanga something the man Abu Samuel the Chagor Mother so thing him to Tushana. Sitting engaged in our country of Mardi, Abu de Sepajo de Condus Sujo de Choje Truth and any Madeira, and to check some of the Madeira. Cheva in a Namdu low language, then be some time at Tina Shipa, member che tele doje semle chuchu tang songora te namsang tende che da kale khabu yor de ine yanda shu je yanda rongma something de sam go yora kale chindo mecha de kale khabu de te doje yu sha yo ma de songwa kale chindo mecha de Tedar kombe to ne kang mingdu jikpa ya tingi mena meka yuse. Kumji chigi na de rongma resam uchu jagora. Tina kon namju ngamju me meka sa je ko mingdi tu de sozu kondu se shena jinge chi na chema ko togbu cha so na ya ko mena meka cha ju doa. Ti so lo kombe wang so je ti yongge wa ba singora. Tedar kale chindo mecha de kale khabu ina ti yu ma sha se. Besu che gure singora. Kale chindo mechades. Teda kombe to ene kange mingdin jikba ya tingi mena mega yose. Ko tambu tar songu ene chema ko soso saba kom disona ko mena ya soso migi ba chade tende regi yoson ra. Te soso samlo tanjo ra. Ngara zo te juju tangu yora. Oh, kachin ti tachi labya chindi metu hese.
So when we have a person who is in the throes of their various afflictions under the control of hatred or anger, whether it's related to politics or whatever it may be, wishing, actually, if we are able to, taking strides to help that person eliminate those kinds of afflictions, or if we're not, making a kind of aspirational prayer that they are able to get rid of those kinds of afflictions, that's really a much better path than sort of taking our normal course of, say, trying to fight with that person. Fighting with them is not actually going to effectuate any kind of change that we want. It's really about working with our own mind. It's that kind of hard work transforming our way of thinking that is actually going to be of benefit. And so this is something that it is hard. There's a verse in which the kind of point of it is that even though this is something which is extremely difficult, we can have a person whose name we can't bear to hear, that then becomes someone we can't bear to part with. So there's a kind of difficulty in engaging in this work, but we shouldn't think like, oh, this is too hard and just throw it out. But rather, the elimination of those kinds of afflictive emotions is something that takes a lot of time. We can transform, we can get rid of our enemies actually by transforming our way of thinking. We're not able to just get rid of that person externally and remove the idea of enemy, but rather this is something that comes from an internal kind of transformation and working with our mind. So even though this is hard work, this is something that we shouldn't give up on.
Oh yeah, that you are land this one, yeah, this she less something do not to labda.
No, Dixon
This one yeah, oh yeah.
Dixon, yeah, 他走送他。
Oh yeah, I need this. Mangan to day in the casoda. Oh, cousin chin sorry to what you oh, the day by Wakasura. That cousin and to Chamba come to the same about that year Chibura. Chamba come the Tanya Sane, Soso Niendela come, Tene Parmala come, Tene Soso Mega, you know, telecom corridor. Oh, Tene, or Tisonda, that Chibura, or T come to the share so. And Tene Chamba come to the Tene, some jet. Tawada Chena, some Tungeda Chena, some Chambada Chawa Comne, and the Tungeda Chawa Tag Chawa Nyamdo, Longangi Kigre Sierra. Sosunian de la Soba Tezu, Takanga Yidoa, Chebaton Sarwa, the Tondi the Conjutunga to Samutana, Tungeda Chena, some Longangi Kigra. Or Kesoneta, Tungeda Chawa Tag Chaku with some country chicken bassinet under social never your mare. Tasoso Kani Chini Cheche. Ani Mahomba ya soso kyun se yonde kunde jikibo langdor yine tamje tan tumge niba yonso sokwe kono otende sanje ji ko ban toba chagi yensam chanju chodo sem ge ba de se so mesem dan ju sim sin yi se so kunju chanju ge sem de la ni cho so memba sem ge se tambo sim je tamje ge tan tumge che ani sanje ji ko ban che toba chagi yensam o samlo te ke wordo Tati Kyo Mambo Samlatang with us, so the said that under Nashin, and the Dimado Mana, Sanja Kovanji, the Toy Yongo Mardo, the Ringbo, Kyoana, Kyoana, Gune, Les Sangbosaj, it was some general Pemba to Chawapa, Pemba to Chawapa, Tito Tashi, John, anyway, Then be ranking concern the Kunden Kibu Sanje the Jurachagi in some in Tagwan and Sambacha or using Bosamata. Some Lord Jackie Chera, Sanje the Kovan, but the Taran Butcheva in a Tabachibu Church again, some Jackie and the Taran Busam Tangora. Send the Chunju the Madomana, send the Chunju to the Madosam Mare. Tenepan Rosan Rangikiwa Shima Yaga Chena Social Kugabi Yore. Chetovia Yore, Tetandana Simshu Keko, Kebana Keba Bado, Kazu Disudo, Casa. Chanju Semto to Kebar Communicate and a Kalekam Kabgurese, Kalekam Chogri Songorva. Sakoka Mambo Samluta, and it tell ya social some jacket to wear the pamba to wear the Yaket Dungache, but cousin Gorgi Yonaya. Chanju sent the Samba Samboke Sonako Tewane Tewan Duerwa. Then at Tewan Doa, Semi Sushi Kilu, you Songodoa. And it take Shala Panda to the social cash and torture on the Shala Pamba to go to Chamba Ninja Chanju Sam Kogur. Tell a cousin Gorna take a Yomare. Tandangazu message the gave your cousin Gorna do station and Kakale Himidoa, social cover there to Doa. Or Tinesha, you didn't go Samutana. On a Chanju Sem, member Chanju Semse. Tezongone social Tagasi, Tumshebe, so remember the social Simsuke Wura. Oh, Sanjay the Kovan able to Tobachari, some Kione Kiwa to the college of getting some Chedis, some tender, some Tangura. Tambu Sem Kiade, Mursum Sigdoa. A teach Elia, Tango the Chanju Sembatozoge, Chanju Choto Sem Kene. And if Chanju Sembe Lapjal Kazel, Lab Karakari Labuna, Tezola Labanashi, Chanju Sembe Tombasone. And it tell a lab gain something Juktum, Chanju Sembe Tomba. Lane, any same case, te sem getelia, Chanju Sembe Tomba Topsa Sona, take you sem getel, Juba sem Yesigdoa, Jusim Sigdoa. Tangone Sanje Kovan Tobialia, Jubi or no. Te Pechan Sungu Vanamju, Trongichil, Drongericine, not Trongitel, Drogu, Laga, the death in the Chego, some Tansona, Mersimira, member, he remember Chigora. Tangone drove some combat motor, Chadicha Karina. Gelato to Rusia, combat Sonani, Jubarwa, Merson do we or the ordination, Jubasem, yes, and Membasem, Jubasem, yes, initiation. Oh, teacher. Any Tedanyamdo, any Carisora, Mersem de Sham, Jusum Shaswa, or the Tenet and Dumchan Jugasem de Chishaswa. Tamersem than Jusum, the all the Shaswa, some jet Tamjetondo, some jet Tamjet Dunga, Tower Chavet Shed to Daga Sanjay Kovan Tobachigi. Simje Tamje Dunga the Tower Chavet to Tende Che Tumgangi. Any Sanjay Kovan Tobachagi, some Sem Keba de Chanju Sam Young order to Kunju Chanju Sam. Tenet and Dum Chanju Sam said. Kunju Chanju Sam de Kari and Goresana, Sukundu Jigi Kusagi order. Chanju Sam Jesam Jan Pamba to Chimbata, Sabacom, Rava, Sutim so, any Tende Simje Tandala. Kale Mambu Capse, Kawa Mabusagi or no. To the Sonam de Tosagore, Sanjay, Kusu Chansambu Sunju, and Pejasambu Chachun Duce, any Shingam Pusum Soban Duce, and a core Pusum Sobala Chesonapa, Sungbede, Kotumge Kangal, or this Sugu Duce, good day, Yunga, Chambata, Ninji Chanju Semto, Sonam de Tosacha. That on them Chanju Sem de Karaka and Kogasana, Tita Mishiba Mongba Sene. Mississippi Mongbasene, Rangazo Condo, Naje, Trato, La Sokbakan, Kanga, Yonsaka, City Cane, and Goresene, Nga Samsage, Nazi, Nga Rawa to Banjamba, Shan Rawa to Banjamba, Yito, Yito Matrata, and that to Rawa to Truba, Sambe Samlu Yogo Ardo, or Tison Jate, Tondam Chanju, some day, social consent. Roa. Mississippi Mongba Pang, Yamon Triba Pang, Mississippi Mongba Pang by Pangba top. On the church of the Landor in the Musum to say, Pangdo you and then you would. Rangi Ken Pang Bata, such a nature Chimachi talk with Namkin Chorwa. Oh, Tini Duji Judelia, and then the Tondam Samji to Koyara. Tondam Samji come to share the Karasana. Tongban Musum to talk with Hitler, Tondam Samji as one. Or that in there. She Saswa. Chinsari, this is Lamna, yeah.
So here, as far as what we have gone through in the text, beginning with that equanimity, we then move into the way of meditating on love and compassion. So again, we can begin with those that we are close to and then continue with those that we have no connection with in this life, and then move on to enemies, thinking that how wonderful it would be if they could be free of their sufferings, how wonderful it would be if they could have happiness. And so in this way, we're going to then move from that sort of aspiration to then wishing, thinking, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to eliminate their suffering. And so again, this is something where we have already in the process of training come to see sentient beings with a kind of affection, eliminating those sorts of categories of friend, unknown, and enemy, where naturally, once we have that sort of feeling of affection, there's that natural arising of wanting them to be free from their suffering. But once we realize, well, how could I really affect eliminating the suffering of sentient beings? We see that, well, I need to get to a state in which I have eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, in which I am able to teach unerringly the points of what is to be practiced and what is to be abandoned. And so this kind of aspiration, this thinking, well, I wish to attain the state of Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings, this is the kind of conventional bodhicitta. And so again, we have gone through this idea of conventional bodhicitta, which is divided into two types. This first being a sort of aspirational kind of bodhicitta. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. That sort of aspiration, again, this is something where we need to think long term. It's not a matter of just thinking about this life. There's very little that we can really do within just say that if we're lucky, the 100 years of this life, but rather we should be thinking about lifetime after lifetime, striving toward this aspiration and really abandoning harming sentient beings, really working for their benefit, a lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And so especially for a Mahayana practitioner, having this kind of long-term thinking is something that is really important, because we are going to need to make an effort over many, many lifetimes, trying to continually improve our sort of qualities of benefiting others and eliminate those kinds of afflictions and obscurations. And so when one is really infused with bodhicitta in this way, one goes from sort of happiness to happiness. There's no difficulty. There's no sort of trouble in working for the benefit of sentient beings, but rather we go from rebirth to rebirth, continuously improving and developing our skills, however long it may take. We aren't really sort of like in this kind of rush to get to Buddhahood. But so this is something, again, where when we are making this kind of aspiration, and again, we have these two types of first sort of aspiring, like in the way that if we are going to say go somewhere, we make a plan like, oh yeah, I need to go take care of this in this place and whatever. And then there is the real engaged or active bodhicitta, wherein one actually takes up the trainings. And so this is something where we need this sort of mental strength, mental fortitude. We're not talking about a story. We're not talking about something that's external, but really it's about an internal kind of development. And we are making this commitment to then, once one takes on the vows of bodhicitta, to really engage in the various trainings. So this is like once you've made a plan to go somewhere, actually making the steps to get there, getting in your car, taking the steps. That's the kind of what active bodhicitta is like. And so when we have this kind of attitude of wishing to attain the state of perfect, complete enlightenment for the benefit of other sentient beings, and we are then engaged in those various trainings, that is a kind of active bodhicitta. So those two types are both conventional bodhicitta, and then we turned to this kind of ultimate bodhicitta. So when one is talking about all of the various kind of trainings in so here again, this sort of thought, that attitude of wishing to be able to free sentient beings from their suffering, and recognizing that in order to do so, one needs to get to the state of Buddhahood, that thought is a conventional thought of bodhicitta. But in order, and so all of the kinds of merits that we accumulate with that thought go toward the collection, the accumulation of merit that will lead to the form body of a Buddha, a complete Buddha with all of the various marks and signs, the pure environment and pure entourage and so forth. But in order to be able to actually get to that state, we need to develop the kind of wisdom that can eliminate this ignorance, this fundamental ignorance that causes us to cycle in samsara. So this sort of natural innate thought that we all have of I, of holding to some sort of autonomously existing I and other beings as having this sort of autonomous innate kind of existence. This is the kind of obscuration that is eliminated through ultimate bodhicitta, which is really the development of this wisdom that directly sees the truth of things, directly sees the sort of reality of phenomena as well as its varieties. This omniscience is developed then through ultimate bodhicitta, which is really this wisdom directly realizing emptiness. So here, this is sort of an overview of what we have gone through thus far in the text.
Oh, yeah, this one. Oh, thing do to net that and the casura. Tondam Chanju be some kebalia, and a caracoris and a shinekora. Shineta Hadon Condamado, Tondam Chanju some ketogomare. Kunju Chanju is some keola, Shinelado mena ketogore, Chamba ketogore, Niji Chambu ketogore, Chamba Chambu ketogore. Shine mena digore. So Yana Yando come Yana Yando come Parucelo long angi kesona. And it's Chamba Chambu, some jet tongeda tena, some solitana long angi kekatona, Ninji Chambu kevara. Some jet candidatuna, Tawadan dana, some long angi kekatona, Chamba Chambu kevara. Some jet tamja tendonga, Sanje Koban Toba Chavi, some come the long angi kekatona. Tandangazu Pacho Yara, Samutani, Samuta Uzura Kabja Tichigora. Tatanda Yana Yanda come in Paruchilico Pacho Meguba, so long angi. Simje Dunga Vachnosuna Tungeta Tendilo, Messever Zangangi Keongura. Teve Pongba Tonsuna, Tawata Tended long Angi Keongura. Kasi Redine Sonson, Simje Redina Combo, Sangarazu Chitan Samuta, Simje Redeton Trata, Nye, Namguna Sitegua. Teach this some Pengi Omara. The Rede Tondus and Congo Serdo, so the Samlinalia. Tungeta Tamjet the China, Satatamjet and Dana, some. Tetuya some Kokora, any course on the Chamba, and the Conto Sagmaro, thought my divisions of Conto Sagmaro. I don't the Chamba that's all Namjumi, Malcolm doing it, 6,000 Medina, Susana Medrosi loves on the Namsa Conto Sagdoa. Or tea in the Tetu Kadulia Congo Yordo, the Tatanga Karshagus in the cases inside the Hardon. Tandam Sangi Kevala, Tomba Yungusum to Togora, Tolam Sangi, Pagwelam, Tolam Sangi Kegura, Delia, anything and Shineta Hardon Yiga Kekuyora. Tandam Sangi Judelia, Hardon Kuyora, then it's that Shineta Hardon Yidishegura. Oh, because Shinet Hardon Yisheswani, Shinet Hardon Yignane, Shinet Sangi, some Jogum Sochigura. Jogum. Tandachi Samultan, Tegan, Nay, Sochigura, some George, Shat, Sochigura, Jogumre, or Shine come to Jogumre. Sadon de come to Chagumre, the Yimbe Kuzan Karakanda, Samultan, or Tire was some Yamay Chabacha, or Tati Remedo, some Chabach and the Park Comne, and the Lolia Cabandoko Yardo. Tell a Chagum Sigora, how don't you come to the Chagum Sigora? And then they soon alia Yandota Rangeta Chaju Sembake, things the Tamje Shineta Hatong in Debu Resonsoa. Tin Debu said the Shineta Hatong in Debu Made. Shineta Hatong in Debu in a Shine Matoba, Hatong Matobnaya, Yandota Rangi Chaju Sembake, things in Mamboyore. Shineta Hatong Matombe, things in Mamboyore, and Tezutin Debu Marwa. Take Arisongueresena. Shine you come. Jogum da, Sadon you come Chegum Debudes on Goda. Chegum dan Jogum you can Debudes, still a combares, this was what thing you could do. Oh, teacher. Go digituna.
So here then, in order to develop ultimate bodhicitta, we need to have a combination of serenity and insight. In order to develop things like this attitude of bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, or things like great love and great compassion, we can develop these through repeated familiarity. If we are able to, in the beginning, it's kind of a contrived or an effortful development. We have to look at each individual being and try to develop this sense of love and compassion toward them that becomes unbearable at seeing them suffer and wants them to be free from that. But we do this again and again, and so and eventually, naturally, whoever we meet with, we will have that kind of love and compassion toward them. Again, this is something where if we're just sort of reciting these verses like, oh, may all sentient beings be free from suffering and so forth, but we don't actually train our minds with regard to each individual being, then we're still going to give rise to our various afflictions and not really have kind of love and compassion toward those individuals. But if we develop this sort of attitude by taking individuals and really trying to develop love and compassion, we can do so in a way that, say, we see beings with love such that our anger doesn't come up, even when they do things that would normally provoke our anger. So if someone says something like untoward toward us, we might be able to not have such a reaction if we have really trained in love. But here, in order to develop what we call ultimate bodhicitta, this requires a union of serenity and insight, like the path of seeing, a superior path that is developed on the basis of having generated first serenity and then combined that with special insight or insight. And so here, as we saw in the quotation previously from the Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra, it says that all of the teachings, it should be known that the teachings of the various types of concentrations sought by hearers, bodhisattvas, and tathagatas are all contained in serenity and insight. So here again, this is really, we can't say that all of the various kinds of concentrations that are developed by hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas, as well as tathagatas, are come from a fully definitional serenity and insight, but rather the sorts of qualities that are developed come from placement meditation, which is symbolized by serenity, and this kind of investigation or analytical meditation symbolized by insight. So serenity really represents those kinds of meditations in which one is trying to develop a kind of abiding concentration, being able to place the mind without having it move. Whereas a kind of analytical meditation, like insight, is going to have this kind of quality of investigation of, is it like this or is it like that? And so this is something where we can see there are many types of meditative stabilizations developed by practitioners, but they really come from these two types of meditation, placement and analysis.
Oh yeah. 다시 내셔야 돼. 시와 내서 심지 공점이 삼을지 따내로 산je kure서 공구이나 가르 공구이나 대 공두사 텔이야 심 내내로 시내서도 심 텔에 내봐마도 대마인게 샹달이야 영화 시와서 고거라 공제유 공제 된티 라심 내발에 샹도 심 샹리야 시와서 고라스 남이 샹다 고발에 소고 샹달 로야데 시와서 고라 시내에서 치료기 유래 영원히 봐 시내 심 삼을당서 데고라 제지도 내네 아니 된대셔지 공공공내니 제대로 된데도 가져 대통나 대통게 니마치지 되나데 소소니 숨 되나데 대 삼을당서 되나고 류다 semla 강에 매봐 되나 대회 나와도 제로 류심 신장기 대회 신식이라 류다 sem 가져 공나 가지고 깔래 가야 요로와 어쩐데 매시 가지 되나 고 깔래 가야 매시거라 류심 신장기 대회 sembe고네 니 미과텔 제대로 된데도 내 통계기 땡기지도 톱선은 신내스거라 다 신내 되게 녀모 자원의 본토고 말해 송도 신내 되게 녀모 자원의 본토고 말해 내금 녀모 메기와 소토기를 마도 자원의 본토고 말해서 다 라도 텔레카르 거서 라도 거래서 Lautong said the Tanda Dika so Lautong song at the Tombani talk by Lautong Songuara. Chitan Lautong and Tony talk by Yinko Mother. Tony Mato Bag, Chingy Bala make by Lautong Yode, Shinet the Lautong Yoda. Tanda Dika so Lautong de Nyomo da, Koetung, Zawane Chusiki. And a Tombani talk by Musum to talk by Shilap the Lautong Songuara. Shinet ko make by the church of the Negiora. Lautong de make by the Nebe Tony Chebachen, Telejan Hagway. Lusim Shinjang Tawad or to this sugar. Tatunda, Lautong Deliane, Yomotawa, the Ponjik in Nova Yore, Sarah. Oh, Tini, Tongetawa, the Ponjik in Nova Yore, Sarah. Or today, Keju she's a shave doa. Or Tina and Nazuni Dosada, Lautong Gidoa. Oh, teach no tanding matter. Or teach you Lamani Tibaton Dosaswa. Lautong Delia. Yintip Zawane Ponjik Nova Yore, Scoba Yore, Sarah. Netunget Zawane Ponjik, Nova Yore, stinging in the Shaswa. Or Tiba to cheat Lamneta, then I do Sabbath Losha.
Yes. So here, when it comes to then serenity and insight, serenity, sometimes translated as calm abiding, which really gets at the two sort of syllables that we have in the Tibetan, which is sort of like a pacification of our various distractions, and an abiding, an ability to stay on an object single pointedly. So whether we are taking the body of the Buddha or any other kind of object, one is able to observe that object without having the mind pulled away, distracted to kind of external objects. So when one trains in this kind of serenity meditation, one is able to eventually eliminate that kind of distraction, such that one is, without any sort of effort, able to remain single-pointedly focused on an object for however long one wants, whether it's a day or many hours or whatever it may be. There's no difficulty in body and mind once one has attained this kind of serenity meditation, because one attains a special sort of bliss and pliancy of body and mind, such that one is able to remain in that kind of meditation without any sort of difficulty. But as we have seen, this sort of serenity meditation can't eliminate from the root our various afflictions. Although it can sort of suppress them temporarily, we need to develop insight, this wisdom, particularly the insight realizing emptiness, in order to eliminate the root of cyclic existence. So here it is the realizing of emptiness, and we can have various types of insight, or sort of special insight, again, to get both of the syllables in Tibetan. And this is in particular here, we're referring to the kind of insight realizing emptiness. And this in particular, this wisdom has the ability to eliminate the root of samsara, to actually get rid of our afflictive obscurations. And it also therefore has the ability to eliminate all of our suffering. So here then, going back to the text, we'll get to the sort of, I think there are four divisions of these sort of abilities, the power of this insight, and we will get back to that.
Oh, yeah, Tandine Danga to Sede. Chanju Simbe, the new legend, said it. Chanju Simbe, the new legend, Kanda, Chanju Simbe, the Negi Chege Namdan di Matose. Chanju Simbe, the Nunal Carasundo Senekanda, Chanju Simbe, the Negi Chege Namda Tombani Tembe, Chun di Matose Songura. Pagbe Chun Dua di Matobars, Tekba Simbu Pagbe Chun Dua di Matobar. Dingin Jin Sam Ji Chokban Zimbanese, Sam Chichi by Dingin Jin Shine, Sam Jikene, only David Chokban Zimbanese or Chokban Zimbane, Najeji Wangese, Tate needed you, Shine Com, Anne, Shanda, Tombani talk about how to make how to come, any other thing is a temple top. Someday, Tambu Niba Sumba Shibat and say, or any Sumi Namwata Namsidachi Ambassador. Thing is Tambu Shabot and the address you order. The Chiribala Yoda, Nambala Yoda, Tombani Mato was such. China Tumuara. That under the Tombani talk with the Laudon committee, Nangbatungu Maibara, Chiruba, Tongbani Shevio Mara. There's a Tongbani Combelato de Mana, and Yamolea, Tarba Toba Shegu Sambaina, Tarba one Toba, my rest this one Gora. Titan Dalo, this one would have Chanju Sembet and no legend. Kanda Chanju Sembet and no Children Namda, Tongbani Tembe Children Namda de Mate, Pagbe Childua, Matobar, Tingin Jam de Chokban Zimbanese. Simple way come Jamni things it is Tamjan Comshania Namgata Namshita Sisha Tarba Tokre some Chiruba that is written there. Oh, there's some Tarba Toba somebody, Deliama Toba Tarba Top Maris on Gora. Things in the Chokban Zimbanese Najeji Wangi Ngombe Najedu Honsi, things in the Temple Johnson Tanga Shiba Top Sonsa. This is the Debatandel case on a Tarba Top on some Gora. Kevin a cave about the things in Yambashan Teto Yore. Tina Chema things in the Zosan is Sungam da Sungmil Kenny Amanya that in the Makiguardo. Or Tison Zanko, Koran Tarba Tops on some Gajecha Mato, one Tarba Toyo Mara Young as on some Lama, long 2 days, a Tongbani Tor meeting Yamu Zawa de Pangama, Yamu Zawa Mabona, and if she name come in Yamu Nega Munjuru Akapa some Remato, Zawa ne Pangtoyo Mar, Tesonza. Tabatoyo Marisong Gordo, oh, Dickager. Chanju Sembe, the new lady, Kanda, Chanju Sembe, the new Chicken Namda de Matu, Pagwich, Tequashim, the one de Matubar. Oh, things in some Choban Zimbani, I get you one, Gingobeng, I get the Tunsis, Tarwa Matobal, things in Temple Tops on the Tarwa Tops of some Gordo. And it Kawada, and it Kawada Kawada Nawala so the Koetung Bangio Mari, Kawada Kawada Nawada Shiwada Yangeda, Mingan Domba said the Ravatungi Nan and Nike and the Ordo, Kashe Mugi, Kay kept the Chikdo, till Mingan Dombata, Tungawada, Yime Dewada, Tukbale. Tukbale also madras, Koetung Electric Maris, things Kajetambu Yonaya. Tongbani talk about how to manna. And then draw through Koala Yonson Medru, and then draw through La Soba Koa Kosak, Nella Tumar and Dudu Kangaroo, Kewalang, Godison Goda. Tungaji Pumbula Janson Metrose, let a Numo Bewangi, Pangbe Kewatela Tungaji Pumbusuara. Let a Numo Bewangi Choya, Sopo, Sem Soran, Ducila Soba Pumbunga Songora. Tungaji Pumbula Janson trail to Gumares, Tongbani talk about how to manna. Tela Gone Tishinship and the Gates. Siala Jesu Timber Turbane, Siala Jesu Timber Turbane, Kashile Tovan Yorose, Siala as a Kansa Tipachimbulam Tumbe Kansa Shale, Tongbani Tembe Shui de Tursona, and it Turbache Sabaja Combache and Musum Tone, and it Tarbat Koala, Koetumel to with a Yamal to Grace and Guara. Siala Jesu Timber Turbane, Kashile Tovan Yorose. She catches those, she son sosa. The Davana Tibetam Japane. You also talk about you see Jordan de Besse, the Sonda, Numombe Tibatan, she said Tibaniga Pangnes and Gora. The Davana Tibetada Pangnes. You also talk about you see Jordan de Besse. You also talk about Timi Pangbe, and then Lamy Antaba, touching Belam the top of the Debe. Chinella Nash, and then Chinella Nash. Shira Combarzo, Shine Yovache, Shine Corva, Tarva Tobala Nambal Kuyoto, Semchito Nebe, Shine Yovache, Tetolia, and it Tombani talk by Shira Haldon de Yamdo Yoko de Songora. Shinela Nash, Shira Combarzo, Tony talk by Shira Combarzaco de Saldo, or Tini Sundu de Conene, Tarva Top to with her. Timmy Pangbe, she number Taba Top to Songora. The Tibani Pangbe, she number Taba. Top Jig, Lam dead, how don't the rest, Titan and then super stingadua. Taige, Yamu Bonjig, no spongy, Tungele to Jig, Lamgus, rest, that Tibani Pangbe, Lam Top Jig, how don't combat with Sungudua. She gave to Papa Kunjo check by legends. I let out in Mabucha study matters. Leja catcher this, Sutimland and then a thing in the top there, thing in the top there, young Shira combatches. Sutim Gelabala Shirison, anything is a top girl. Chutimji labala nemena. Ani samlo mambo da lega mambo che tende chido ni tingji komlo yomaro komlo metu zani tingji top top mardo teso da chutimji labade sashi tabu je shire tira dela tene ni tingji kom tene shire bhaton kom gode sungwara chutim karsa chutim den nambine sashi ta pechagdwa yendenji tso kande ke ko na chutim dan migi chubungi chutim ina de ke cholungi chutim ina de chanju sembe chutim ina da migi chubung chutim de pabaina samlo mangbo nyokta mangbo ma cho do to ti mena be samlo cha che ni shine la to komela semba korante ti toli abu te to marwa o ti sungwera tege do paba kunjo chibale ja ka che de chutim la ne ne tingi jin top de tingi jin top de ja shirwa kombar che do so o ti ba do chilo na.
So here then picking up in the text, we have then following the quotation from the King of Meditative Stabilization, we have then also the Arya or the Bodhisattva compilation says, those who haven't heard these various teachings of the Bodhisattva compilation and have also not heard the implemented teaching on the Arya's ethical conduct, who think that single-pointed concentration alone is enough, will fall into the pit of arrogance due to pride. So thinking that just a single-pointed meditation alone is sufficient, there are those who really strive to develop that kind of single-pointed concentration. They think that serenity alone is sufficient in order to get themselves out of suffering. Now here, it's not just serenity alone for some. Others might conjoin that with some kind of insight that is not the insight realizing emptiness. So looking at the various sort of defects of the desire realm and so forth, these are insights that are common with non-Buddhists. So someone can have a union of calm abiding or serenity and insight that is a lesser sort of insight that isn't the insight of wisdom realizing emptiness, but is rather related to the sort of faults of the desire realm. And through that, they could gain a stabilization, a meditative concentration, all the way up to even the highest points of samsara, like the peak of samsara. But without having this kind of insight that is realizing emptiness, there's no way that they can get out of samsara. They can get out of cyclic existence. And so there are those that think they are getting themselves on a path that will lead out of samsara, but instead they are taking rebirth, say, in the peak of samsara, and remaining for eon after eon in this kind of meditative concentration, only to have to fall back into, say, the hell realms afterward. And so they haven't eliminated the root of afflictions. And so they can have this kind of pride of thinking, oh, I've attained liberation. I have this kind of single point in concentration and I've developed insight, but they haven't actually developed the kind of insight realizing emptiness necessary to extricate themselves from cyclic existence. So as such, they cannot gain complete release from rebirth, old age, sickness, death, misery, lamentation, sort of like the ways that we cry out and lament our suffering, mental unhappiness, and disturbances. Neither do they gain complete liberation from the cycle of the 6 states of existence, nor from the heaps of suffering, mental and physical aggregates. So again, these physical aggregates taken due to the power of karma and the afflictions are form, feelings, discrimination, consciousness, and compositional factors, all of those constitute this kind of cyclic existence. And one who has not developed the wisdom realizing emptiness is unable to liberate themselves from that. So keeping this in mind, the Tathagata has said that those hearing the teachings will help you gain liberation from old age and death. So for all these reasons, those who wish to attain the thoroughly purified transcendent wisdom by eliminating all obscuration obscurations should meditate on the wisdom while remaining in serenity meditation. So we need to have, so this gets at the third point, that this wisdom, this insight, realizing emptiness, is able to develop this kind of, as it says here, thoroughly purified transcendent wisdom that can get rid of these two obscurations. And so we need to have serenity. That is the basis on which we then develop this kind of insight. But it is only once those two are conjoined together. Insight or wisdom, sort of insight alone can't have the power without that basis of serenity. And serenity alone is not able to remove the root of samsara. And so here, then it continues into the next quotation, which is the heap of jewels Arya Sutra says, single-pointed concentration is achieved by adhering to ethical conduct. So then with the achievement of single-pointed concentration, you meditate on wisdom. So here one needs to have this kind of basis of ethical conduct. This is described as like the foundation on which one is then able to engage in the practice of meditative stabilization. So whether we are holding ethics of just abandoning the 10 non-virtues, or we have lay vows, or full ordination, whatever it may be, that kind of holding of ethical conduct is the basis upon which one then develops the sort of mental acuity of single-pointed concentration in serenity meditation.
Oh yeah. Oh, don't dream it was a lesson. Oh yeah, today. That's an data. Or Shirab Kini, Ishi number tabato, Ishi number taba, shooting person so shake at it or started to be. Tene, Papa Tekba Chimbo, La Teba Comben Dole Chance. Rigibo Shirab Nyora, Menena, Chanju Sambanam, the Tekba Chimbo La Teba, Tekba Chimbo La Chidari and Juma Namima, Tombani talk by Shirab the Mena, and the Tekba Chimbo Lam Tolam La Sobaya Tomne, Tekba Chimbo Lam Cone, Contra to be a marton, or Tisongua, Rigibo Shirab La Nyora Menenas, Tombani talk by Shirab La Menena. Chanju Sembanam de Tekba Sembola Teba, Tekba Sembola Chidaria, Jorangami Maos, and Tekba Sembolam, Ya Turn a Tolam Golam Sobayan to Tomada Songora. Rigibo Namdran Deja Dedar, Chanju Sembanam de Tekba Sembola Teba, Tekba Sembole, Joa Kanchi, and Rondis. And Tetamjene number a year Semge, turned out to Yanda or somebody Joa. Rigbar Chaose. Rigibo Namdran Dejan, the Chanju Sembanam, the Tekba Sembola Teba, Tekba Sembole Chua, Kanchi around the Lam Kanchi around the Tetam Jene, number Maye Semge, Tunda Chu Yanda Bar, Sambale Chua Rigbar Chao, Tashine Combat 10 Yongo de Songora. And what debate was Jonah Mount Russian? She did the matter. Oh, yeah.
So here then it says, again, with the achievement of single-pointed concentration, you meditate on wisdom, and wisdom helps you to attain a pure, pristine awareness. Through pure, pristine awareness, your ethical conduct is perfected. So it's on the basis of ethics that one then develops this kind of single-pointed concentration within which one can then develop this wisdom. So the meditation on faith in the Arya Mahayana Sutra says, O child of noble family, if you do not abide in wisdom, I cannot say how bodhisattvas have faith in Mahayana or how they will set forth in the Mahayana. So here, this is stressing that without this wisdom realizing emptiness, there is no kind of path of seeing. There are no paths for a bodhisattva to progress through. So there's no paths that would go to Buddhahood without this kind of insight. And so if you do not abide in wisdom, I cannot say how bodhisattvas have faith in the Mahayana or how they will set forth, progress through these various Mahayana stages. O child of noble family, you should know that this is because the bodhisattva's faith in Mahayana and setting forth in the Mahayana occurs as a result of contemplating the perfect Dharma and reality with a mind free of distraction. So again, here, this is stressing that insight by which it is necessary to progress to Buddhahood, that's the only way that we can move along these paths, is in turn dependent upon having serenity as a foundation.
Oh yeah. Don't they shineda ladon yigal tenani take what should be you and tamjin jongure sungudwa, don't they? Take tamjani number may assembly turned down. Choi yanda bar sambale jonga rigbacha. Choi yanda bar sambale rigbacha, Tongbani sambale ladon la teni kepurta, don't that shineda. Take what should be come you and then some tamjete, shine simchi to nebe shineda. Ni Tongbani talk about ladon la teni jonga rigbacha. Tisongda Shineta Hado Nigalia Dugrese. Kache Dose. Shineta Treve Hadon Bashikene, Nanjurbe, Shine Mabes, Hadon Chibu, Tombani Combe, Hadon Chibu Combaina. Shineta Treve Hadon Bashikene, Bashis Conesongora Chibu, Chibune, Nanjurbe Sim. You number one, you're Shine Mana, and it's some teaching to neighbor things in the Marwa, come Javina, sick toll, sometimes a tattoo Marwa. Some Yula number one, you come J. You the mind, you shan't paying to race on Gora. Lunginana Dube, my mission to temperament euros. Show me the Pasha and Haba Jaguna, coach, you can take Marton, the day you take it. Shine you and Mammy Bay Akadulian Barge, Devon and she to Gora. Lunginana Dube, my mission to temperament euros. Tevena, Ishi now a Shindo, that on the Niga quarter, Shineta, Tombani talk about how to Niga, you then take what you will am con the concentrate of grace on Gora. Tevena, Ishi now a Shindo, to check. Ishi now a Shindo, the sour Mijun de Ese. Oh, sour Mijun de Tombani talk with Shida Magumna Sigoto. The Davan Niga draw a temperature. Shineta how to Nigal temperature, same church but things in their quarter, and then Nelu Tadu talk with Tombani talk with how to the Chevachin and Tear quarters. The Issy Papa Yonson Yangel and Deva Shibun Doleja. Neither Namgini or the Tiba do Chikuna Tamba. Mountain.
So here, then again, this kind of union of serenity and insight is the basis then for all the various kinds of Mahayana qualities that one develops. And that is the way in which one actually progresses along this path. So setting forth in the Mahayana occurs as a result of contemplating the perfect Dharma and reality with a mind free of distraction. So again, this kind of foundation of serenity is then the basis for developing insight that allows one to develop these various qualities. So a yogi's mind will be distracted to various objects if he cultivates only insight without developing serenity. It will be unstable like a butter lamp in wind. So if one tries to just develop the kind of insight and investigation, it's going to be unstable like a butter lamp in wind. You can't have that kind of insight be very penetrating without the stability that comes from developing serenity first. And so since then clarity of pristine awareness will be absent, these two, serenity and insight, should be cultivated equally. So this is a case in which one needs to have these two together. If one doesn't have the insight developed by developing this wisdom, realizing ultimate reality, one can't get out of samsara. But without the kind of stability that comes from serenity, there's no way that insight can have power. So here it's stressing again that one needs to have both of these in order to be successful.
Oh yeah. You can draw a temperature or stupid dramatic. That teacher Papa Yonson Yangel by Champion Dollars and Donald Tenderson Shasra. Yandu Nam Genet Tishin Ship ri meton de se nyendo nam jene te shin shekbe ri ane nelu tadu de meton de tingin jin she chebe cheros tingin jin shuk che res shirab chunwe chero tongba nye tobe shirab de komju she chunwa res nyendo nam jene se te shin shekbe ri chitawa shindo ta tikpa jamju sambatu to na shin meton de se res ja jire tingin jin she chebe chero shirab chunwe chero jamju samba nam jene tong meje tongba nye tong meje se mise de se shirab she chebe chero sebo cheje de tongye de she chungre se kare shirab she cheba shuk che ma to ne se chungda yo res shine kumede tingin jin chunwe chero tishin shekbe ne tamje se de tishin shekbe ke shine da la don ni ga chanya ba yoza ni shine da la don chungba dembe chero ni ga chanya ba chungba dembe chena ka che de se shine ji top je ne marme lungi ma ge ba shindo number to be lung nam ki sem yor me jo shine yo ba te ge ani number to be sem yo mar ma me lung me ba ne na shere 사동 진에 따왕에 쯤에 타다 빵배 사동 여바되게 따왕에 다도 따와라 속바 너 진짜 따와 lokbe 따와 저서 강가 빵배 숨고라 사동 진에 따왕에 쯤에 타다 빵배 현다게 미치데 셴 무득발라 속바 진짜 따왕에 바터서게 다 여발라 속바 땅지라 와친게 다 여발라 속바 어쩌고 봐 요르체 도고 말해서 미치데스 dawa treme dole chigeto shine topje yoa mebar jus tingi ki komje yutile mayo biche chechudo ne to gora hadon ke ne ridan dawo hadon ke tawa ngembe wando ma so ache yang tak be tawa tongba ni tok be tawa de ya ushin sa so na ne tawa do tawa la so ba tawa ngembe to su yo to ma ridan tembo ne gre serwa hadon ke ne ridan dawo guru she song ba tabos ote ba do chi stuna mountain matter.
So here, then continuing with another quotation, it says, therefore, the Arya Sutra of the great and complete transcendence of suffering says, hearers cannot see Buddha nature because their single-pointed absorption is stronger and wisdom is weaker. Bodhisattvas can see it, but not clearly because their wisdom is stronger and their single-pointed concentration is weaker. Whereas Tathagatas can see all because they possess serenity and insight to an equal degree. So here it says that hearers, sort of their wisdom realizing emptiness is lesser than the kind of stabilization that they have gained through their development of serenity. And for that reason, then, their sort of realizations, their insight is not to the degree of bodhisattvas. And bodhisattvas here are lesser in terms of their degree of stability compared with those that are Tathagatas, in that although they have this kind of penetrating wisdom, again, they're a little bit lesser in their ability to be abide stably. So Tathagatas, those that are fully enlightened, can see all because they possess serenity and insight to an equal degree. So again, it then comes to this example again, saying, due to the power of serenity, the mind will not be disturbed by the wind of conceptual thoughts, like a butter lamp undisturbed by the breeze. Insight eliminates every stain of wrong views. Thus, you will not be affected by the views of others. So this kind of the combination of serenity and insight, serenity, it gives us the sort of power to remain stably, like a flame of a lamp that is not moving around all over the place. So that kind of unwavering sort of stability. And then insight is what allows us to sort of penetrate and get rid of any kind of wrong views. Wrong views regarding a self, those that are espoused by other schools, like say there being some sort of singular, permanent, autonomous self, and so forth. So we need both this quality of being unwavering, not becoming distracted by anything, and then it is in that context that our insight can fully develop. So the Moon Lamp Sutra says, By the force of serenity, the mind will become unwavering, and with insight, it becomes like a mountain. Therefore, maintain a yogic practice on them both.
Oh, yeah. That the way na niga nenjo to chawar nesos, that on that she net the hado niga di come go grace, that cup to that so to the shake doa. Oh, the way na niga nenjo to chawar neso, nenjo should come go grace, chawar nesos. That tell a tomar rishi nenjo ba kangi, tawar and yodo she net the hado dubar juva she net the hado get sola. Temperature. The name of Karshik Dosana Shineda, Tera Nanjo Kangi, Tawa Nuto Shineda Towers, Nanjo Batok Yabo Cheche, Towers do Yabo Cheche, Doa, Pene, Shineda Haldon, Druber Juve, Shineda Haldon, Druber Juve, Kuso, Tadi Shake Doa. Tewe na niga nenjo to cheba na tinti kapji 20 basha. Tela tomar rishi nenjor beese. Kangi tewara nyurtu shine dal haton drubara gyuru ase. Shine dal haton ki kyuso la tembar chaos. Ta shine dal haton drubji ki kyuso de yagu tembure ese. Kyuso de yagu chi chansuna ne shine dal haton ki de tewara yagu jen drubtu ura kyude mansana drebu yonto umarto. O tiri ta tonda handi ne maa karshek dosena. Tinginji tamjerwa, Shine dal haton ki kumjunyi nal dubadese, de sonda shila sondeji tinginji komgurese. Oh, de shila sondeji tinginji kombar chebalaya, ne shine dal haton ki kyuso tengurese, tambo kyuso tungi dagadi yabu tsanga chegurese. Tandine ma ti shekdwa, kyuso di shekdwa. Oh, deji lapshana, tudichi lapshana, de wodamandashana.
So here it concludes then with, therefore, maintain a yogic practice on them both. It's sort of a summary of this section, saying that we need to have both a practice of serenity as well as insight. And that's the sort of main point of this. So to do this well, then, we turn to the next section, which is the common prerequisites for meditating on serenity and insight. So initially, the yogi should seek the prerequisites that can assist him or her in actualizing serenity and insight quickly and easily. So in order to be able to, if we have recognized that this is the kind of goal that we wish to attain, we need to have the right kind of collection of causes in order to be able to practice these various types of meditation. So one needs to have the collection of causes or the kinds of conducive conditions to be able to really obtain serenity and insight. So recognizing the importance of having both of these practices, one then should seek out the kinds of prerequisites or causes, the kinds of conditions that will best allow us to be able to actualize serenity and insight.
Oh, yeah, that's negi kuso de shegora. Tambu tradition je komdu santene tungi karkar kores te tungi de shegwa. Ta shinegi kuso kanshina sta shine da lado karitumne kuso de chibarish dogwa. Shine komgine kuso chibarish lado komna kuso chibarish de shegwa. Shinegi kuso kanshina se tambu soso tesa de yude yabuch kores tumbe yuna ne badase. Shine da lado kom japsagi jini sajada kom jabada tumbe sanechi kore sura. Tumbe yuna neba de chikshara. And this combien kansa soso de deba chunga da chokshi bach kore chara. Dujun chokshi bach kore. Deba mambu yuna. Chokshi mena ni ungumato samlu mambu tangira samlu mambu kundu lega mambu chene chikan samlu tanya de tegu marto lega mambu yo tesu kanga samlu kode yora. Deba chokshi chokshi bach kore sa. Bene chokshi bada. Chawa mambu yonso pang badas. Lega mambu tende mebas kora. Tingzi chanja tumge kugyo tong. Chawa mambu yone komu yungu marwa. Chawa mambu yonso pang badas. Sutim nambar dak badas. Ne soso megi chubun sutim inada. Kenyin sutim inada. Kelon inada. Karina soso timdi yabu sunge chikore chara. Sutim nambar dak badas. Deba la sokwe nambar tokwa. Go so bang bata the value della so but to ya nam do mo te go sam sene sam ma butana anything is come to te zu kan sam ko de ra de bala so ba number talk ba yo so bang bata nam do ma bu ko ma bu ye ba te zu sam nyu tang ke ko re so da te la yo de nga ta ta de ba ne tun be yu yin ba she ba o te de yu chi na ne tun be yu na ne ba re so da tun be yu yin ba ra ne ka na shebar chadese o tiche tatu le la dumeta ko da sela so ba segme bar nyebe chire nyela wata ta sa lungba de kande ko re so so ko ya to lo da khala la so ba te zo le la bo che kale ma che che nye le la ko re si go da ti me ni ha te so ne ti che kan do de ko da kyo mi su ba da la so ba mine be chire ne sa ne de sa bo ko re Kyo mi simba anyo dra songe kuma chakwa da bata chi nyo de shenge de me na ya ga do simbu songe me ko de chere kyo mi simba da dala so ba me ne be chere ne sang wa da ane ne me be chere ne me be sai be sa sang wa sa je lo ba da de da na sa ke e shi de yo ne di ma to ne kom ja lo me na sa na che nya ga yo to ne me be sai be sa sang wa ko de 아니 수dimdan dembe tawa chungba yebe tosawata tanne pedo tende ne kone embatindir kongora rida tende te inde sa roba chiksi yona tawa tumba be roba chi yona yaga yor singi yona yaga re tende ko tian sudimdan tawa tungen skoda sudim yabu songe ani tawa samlu tangda chikba skor ma to ya samlu mabu tang de jigde lega mabu che ko tende ne de ma to 수dimda tawa sungpa yinpe draw sangpo chikwa, rokpa yangpo chikwa re. Yani, kyo mangpo dagi, makang be chida, mi mangpo, miso mangpo pachu suki mangpo chingani sangsing yo ra, tinte mewa chikwa re. Yani, chanang konglo chudang chik tinte, drachabu tinte mesa chikwa re. Tingi ji komte du drati, tingi ji komye neba chishu tirwa namsan ti choli yin rukyo ra. so or chemu tachu yesir tene lekbar damba ose ne deba chuma kangsena tati re she do odiba do chi lamna ni ma deba chuma ma yong do
So here then it says the prerequisites then that are necessary, the kind of conducive conditions to developing serenity, and actually these are common as well to developing insight. We need to have these sorts of prerequisites or conditions for that as well. So it says here that the prerequisites necessary for the development of serenity are to live in a conducive environment, to limit your desires and practice contentment, not being involved in too many kinds of activities, maintaining pure ethical conduct, and fully eliminating attachment to all other kinds of conceptual thoughts. So in terms of the sort of place that we are staying, we need to have a kind of a situation or a sort of a place that is conducive to what we are trying to do. So this is then explained as providing easy access to food and clothing. So we need to have a sort of situation where we are able to access and have the things that we need. We also need to work on our sort of our own desires. We need to, if we have many desires and are constantly thinking about the things that we want and allowing our mind to go all over the place, there's no way that we can develop this kind of meditation. And if we don't have any sort of satisfaction, of satiation, or contentment, then again, our mind is going to all various types of objects, which is a huge impediment to being able to develop this kind of meditation. And then there is sort of reducing our activities. If we are involved in many kinds of worldly activities, then again, we are sort of unable to have the kind of necessary environment for developing serenity. So here, if we then also need to have maintain pure ethical conduct and eliminate fully attachment and all other kinds of conceptual thoughts. So we need to hold to some sort of ethical kind of commitment, whether that is eliminating or abandoning the 10 non-virtues, holding to some sort of lay vows or other vows. We need to have that kind of ethical foundation in order to be successful in this meditation. And then not being attached or not having so many conceptual thoughts is another sort of necessary prerequisite to trying to develop serenity. And so again, this needs to be a conducive environment. Then this is described as having 5 characteristics, which is first providing easy access to food and clothes. And so forth. So we need to be able to be in a place where we can get what we need easily. If we are constantly having to search out for things, that's not going to be very conducive to developing meditation. And this should be as well free of evil beings and enemies. If you have people that are constantly, like, say, trying to provoke or fight with you while you're trying to develop your meditation, that's not going to be a good situation for developing our meditation. Also, if there's sort of like this direct kind of negative influence, that's something that really acts as an impediment to our meditation. As well, we need to have a place that is free from disease. If we are, say, somewhere where the water isn't clean or our surroundings aren't clean, that's not going to be conducive to developing meditation. And also, like, say, when we are, imagine meditating in Tibet back in the day, having those with you. So if we're in a really isolated place, having someone with us who shares similar views. This is something that is important. If we have someone who's totally contrary to our goals and our views, that's not a very good companion to have. But we need to have friends with similar sorts of views, similar kinds of ideas in order to support us in that. And finally, there is not being visited by few people in daytime and with little noise at night. So we want to be in a place where there's sort of little hustle and bustle, and also not having a whole lot of noise, because noise is really seen as harmful to developing meditation.
Oh yeah. Tandi man lotion. Deba chunga gang shena se tan du jun choshi ko deba chunga de kare shigana. Chego la sokba sambo am mangbo la lagbar chaba meba o se. Ta rabdu chunga de jene ko chego la sokba. Chazan rab chikche ne cheya de chikche ni smado jidane namjune ko sumde tinde nyacho yo mato. Nyare ina ko shenda to dali yin samche. Choye yo che se ya koye yo che se. Yang sendar pa ming yang ma to mang bu nya cho yo ma to tin ne shi ta shi ne da tu che tu ne embol tenge ne ti le ja mang bu nya yo ma to de ba chung wa ka shi na che ko la so ba sang bu mang bu la lag ba cha ba me ba o se ya bu den de ya ne shi ju me ro ko ka ri ne ma ja ma to tu so bu ya bu cho ya ta da le ya o ti ko ma to tang de che me ta ya bu shi ko sa o te ne ka sa Chogola sokba sangbo mangbola lagbar chakba meba ose. Chosheba karisigressne, chosheba kashina, chogola sokba ngenge, some nyebe, tado chosheba kaimbata. Chogola soba kare nyena yako, different of ngemusneta, or different of chune, digrimado, yagnesi yamar, or the yaumedungatili yako se yamarwa. Chogola sokba ngenge samji. Nyebe, nyebe, some nyebe, Tado Choshi Kaiba, Choshibaka, Choshi City, Tang Ragba, the Dujun Choshi Sera. Choshi Manako, the one Sajuton Singaba, maybe Choshi Doja, Sajuton and Siri, teaching it, Tidimas, the members go, teaching, Tidimatilla, Yaru, or Sierra, or Tindi members go, Kanye, but the Choshi, Dixon, sometimes Timber Square. Sugar Soba, Yamus, some nyebe. Tado Choshiba Kayan Baus. Jawa Mambo Yonso Pangbas, Tamachi Droson, Tikarisiresne, Nosola Sobe, Nosola Soba, Lenga Yonso Pangbos, Son Jaya Dan Tendesian and T. Samluko things Kumarwa. Kimbada Rabdu Chua Kanda, Haja, and Mudi, Cheba Yonswa, Kimbada Rabdu Chua Swina, Mambolpa. Jawache Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe the New Corridor, and Kesha Mambu Senor the Mambu Yungura, Kimbada Rabdu Chua Kanda, Haja, Mundin, Geshe Yeshe that in the D. Chimbuche Pangure. Mundin Cheba also Pambata. Man Chebata, man Tayan La Soba. Man Tanani, never Mabu, any membership, no matter. See Jayla Soba, see this you are the Sirabu said. Tindeja, Karan Dion to Dijan and Dion to say, and Mimamu Yongura, what in this you are that. I look how I know so. Man Chebata, Karma Kursi said, Nimandawa, Dusuda, Sada, Tinit temperature and a courage over a Tarjo and a Kadusu over a sada, Tozudan Sigas or Otizusa. Karmachuala Soba, Yoso Pamba Kayamba. Chutum number Tabakashina, Chutum number Tabakora said, Tomba Niga, Ranshida, Chebe, Kanamato, Chebe, Lebe, Shita Medewasre. You have to indeed the Gasra. Sotarda. And the chances of Tombola Sobacarina, Tomba Nisera, Tomba Niga, Ranshita, Chebe Kanamato, Chebes, Ranshita, Chebe Kanamato, Chebe, Lebe, she, Midewadas, Ranshinji Kanamato, and the cursor, Chebe Kanamato, said, kind of New Ora, Ranshinji Kanamato, Sanako, Chita. Missulina Tibai get to the Ranshinji Kanamato, Tonsigora, Miss Ebala Soba, Shella Sawa Sebala Soba, Chita, Mikangal, Tiba Dretele, Ranshinji Kanamato Asigora, could Ranshinji Tiba, the Tichogma was up to join. So Tombakar Kelana. Chebe Kanamato, Kenya, Koran, Kenyan Mixeg, Kelly at the Yorwa, Kizuna, Rabbi join and Miss Kelly, Chajus and Miss Chita, Millie Chogba Yinaya. Tini Kenya da Rabbi Choa da Chanjusan, but the young social Tombaland Mesovetic Siora. Chitan Milichon and Tiba Mena, Social Kelam, but they were Delia, Chebe Kanamato Siora. Keranti Tombadela Bena, and did show Mardase. And Natambuna did the chigman, did the chigmessage, a coquelam, but they tended to Chebe Kanamato, Tonga Sigra, Rabbi Choa de Nutomas. Ranshinji Kanamato, Tonga, Chebe Kanamato, Tonga Sigra. Ranshinji Kanamato, Neba, Chebe Kanamato, Neba to say, Power. Oh, Cabandoson. Sitting number of Kashina, Tobanigaya, Ranshinta, Chebe Kanamato, Chebe, Lebe Shita Mendewas, Tetuda, Mengewas Quarter. Pame Barena, Yase, Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe, Tombata Geva Chonsona, Namsan Shakba Chetene, or Tino do Chonsota, Mamba, and the Chigmas and the Social Shakwa. Kimbers with Dowan Joba Segura. Pame Barena, ya, Kimber Doba Yoba, give us an nutrition to Cheba dance, nutrition to Shakba Tatunda. The Rabbi Chong is in the social source, and they were to do some Shakba. Oh, Tim and that's also the end of the condition which I thought Mevlet out. Nyade Tomba Tomba Pamba Church, Mero, or Tibata Jona. Nyade.
So then, again, to continue with these individual kind of conducive conditions or prerequisites for serenity, it says limiting your desires refers to not being excessively attached to many or good clothes, such as religious robes and so forth. So we shouldn't have a great deal of desire, like trying to possess many things. Now, those who are, say, ordained, who are monastics, are allowed to say, hold on to things for the sake of others, but for one's own personal use, having this great desire to have many things and hold on to them is a real impediment to developing serenity. So limiting the desires refers to not being excessively attached to many various things. And the practice of contentment means always being satisfied with any little thing, like inferior religious robes and so forth. So here, this means kind of of having a satisfaction with whatever comes our way, whether it's something that we might want to deem inferior or whatever. As long as we have what we need to reasonably sustain ourselves, we should feel a kind of contentment, not striving for more, not wanting something that is excessive, but rather being content with what it is that we have. And then not being involved in many activities refers to giving up ordinary activities like business. So if you are sorry, just to step back for a second. If you constantly have desires for many things, if you're wanting to say always get something nicer and better, it's almost like it's like drinking salt water where you just want more and more. You're increasing your thirst. So as much as we engage with our various attachments and desires, we're going to want to have more and more. And this is the kind of opposite of having contentment. And then next, again, is turning away from being involved in many activities, like say business. If one is constantly engaged in worldly activities, and that's the sort of main focus, you don't have as much energy to be able to put toward your meditative practice. So we can't really develop meditative stabilization when one is engaged in all kinds of various worldly activities. And then it says avoiding too close association with householders and monks. This is really referring to whether one is a householder or a monk. If one is trying to develop meditative stabilization, having constant interaction with others, just sort of like talking with them and engaging with them, is going to, again, be a kind of obstacle to developing this sort of mental stability. So we shouldn't engage in so many various activities or sort of interaction with people when one is trying to develop this kind of meditative stabilization. So it says then, and we should totally abandon the practice of medicine and astrology. So if you are trying to say act as a doctor, act in medicine, you're going to be forced into many interactions, as well as like doing astrological readings to give people advice. Again, that's going to be a kind of distraction from one's meditation. And then, it says then, even in the case of the statement that a transgression of the hearer's vows cannot be restored, if there is a regret and an awareness of the intention not to repeat it, the awareness of a lack of true identity of the mind that performed the action, and familiarity with a lack of true identity of all phenomena, then that person's ethical conduct can be said to be pure. Here, this is referring to then having the kind of ethical conduct as a foundation, whether one is holding, say, the vows of individual liberation, whatever level that may be, or the Bodhisattva vows, and so forth. One needs to avoid two types of actions. And so here, sometimes the like exact translation is a little bit confusing, but here there are two types of sort of negative actions. There are those that are naturally non-virtuous, which would mean something like killing, that is negative for a person who has taken a vow, as well as for a person who has not taken any kind of a vow. And then there are those sorts of violations of prescripted activities. So when one has taken up monastic vows, there are certain activities in which one can't engage that aren't non-virtuous for any ordinary person, but are sort of against the kind of vows that one has taken up. So one should, when you transgress either a sort of naturally non-virtuous action or the vows that one has taken, one should view it with regret and this develop an intention not to repeat it again, sort of immediately in a really quick way. And this is the kind of way of thinking, and we'll get into the sort of lack of the way in which one should view this. But here, this kind of ethical conduct and the restoration of ethical conduct through confession or purification is another of these prerequisites. Yeah.
Nyandu tombala sudwa, Nyandu tombala suduta, duala soba to Zukapso, 대초는 소바 대주 동배 남샤 송여봐 년대지 동발라 판바주 소메로와 소바 가인 바텔라세 판바주 소네 코초에 요마도 판바들 잡체던 참미세니 다주 뭐지 판바주 소네 쩌서 미로셔라 년대지 동발라 판바주 소메로와 소바 가인 바 코초에 양자 다르 체들 다에 매버 소라 당미 토비에 요마르 다 년대지 동발라 판바 시슨 게 줘라 니 어디 쓴 거야 판바 줘서 미로와라 송바 가인 바텔라 양 겨바다 뎀바다 가인 바텔라 야어 다른 판바 총송섬 드림마 송섬제 kon남사 겨바체 아니 치트레 메자베 톰심체 아니 샤바체네 니 셈강게 레데 제베 셈들라 오니 메버 소소 똑베 치다 니 동반이 곰 최탐제 원이 매바 공배셔 대의 최좀 넘버 따바 코너에 맞춰버 자오서 샤좀 수시제 아니 동반이 곰 근데 전에 그 다에 요셔래 단디나잖아 박바 전에 박바 마제 된 개바셔와래 공도 쉬버 자오 대 가바송도 쓰나 마제 된 개바셔 되나로 송샤셔 대회나 게제 그거든셔 대회나 대 개바 매버 셀라 루바 두주를 비해서 요거다 대회나 대 개바 매버 셀라 아니 곰발라 응도 점버 차오 저 텐데 탑시 전에 샤좀 세고래 송도 대바 남라야 센데다 세치마 치메 니메 남바 망보르 교로와라 예라 제라 대달라 넘버 또 방버쳐 대바 첨부제 요 말세더라 대베 고고답서부터 줄 대바 남라야 센데다 치마라 니메 넘버 망보르 교라 예라 제라서 센데다 치마라 대버산 마부체고 텐데 존나 텐데 내가 마도 요 말이 삼체 예라 제라 대다 넘버 또 방버쳐 도요나 서부터 줄야 대고고 삼텐데 마부 저저 님이 견데 삼로탄시네 방고래서 넘버 7도나 코로아베 응어보 동해와 도바마 메도바야 론데 넘버 7도나 깨게 셰저로 직찬은 된데스는 데그레서스 넘버 7도나 코아베 응어보세 코에 뒤베 응어보시고라 도바 메도바세 이도와다 이도메와 셔르시고라 도바다 미도바야 론테라로 코야 이도와다 메마 카리나 대다 탐제네 넘버 직베 최제 미덴바데 저도 상마 넘버 직베 최제 레세 소소다 직종게 카가 소소다 되면서 카가 레시 인섬 샤야지 인섬네 되면서와 대다 탐제다 다 링불 메토바 제와는 주나세 다로 카디나 텐데케 요마리나 고 저도 카가 전에 다 쉬저래지라 네다 루다 롱줄에 서버 표승 쳐보다 도가데 야가르네 강가 샤야르마도 소승님도 기회지 요마도 소승님도 예버도 코케와다 tik베레 사요네 팅님도 도르마도 센다게 도마도 소부데 샤셔고라 자 되면서와 대다 탐제 다 링부르 메토바 대와르 주나 다들라 지실 학바르 착발라 서바죠 가시 질 착바제 가시를 콘드제 어떤데 그 제일 전다게 면도 강가 샤야레 도하 삼고레셔라 다들라 지실 학바르 착발라 서바 유르냠도 곰베 넘버 도바 탐제 방바셔스타 남도 담메다 테고게 테고 삼사 마부여도 어때서 가져 용용 제고여도 아니 삼로 담두사 땡지 곰두사 셈체주도 내일 팽겨라 디 신에게 규소소도 아티바도 이나다 하도 그 규소래도 도도 검제 삼아 대다 학바르 착발라 소바 유르냠도 곰베 넘버 도바 탐제 방바죠 다던데 데바 초시발라 소바 골렘베고 남도 마부 용한테도 삼바 방베 방니까지 도용와 자와용와 제고래 송도 대탐제데 신에게 디디 규소세르 시에서 이나 하동 규소란도 와티바도 신에 규소데 시에서 디바도 지금나 탐제 방바죠 셔바.
So here, then, getting back to this sentence, so even in the case of the statement that a transgression of the hearer's vows cannot be restored. So here, a downfall in terms of the transgressions of like a hearer's vows, there are 4 downfalls. We won't need to get into all of them, but if one, even in that case, if one is able to develop quickly this sense of regret toward that, if there is a regret and this kind of awareness with an intention not to repeat that kind of transgression, and then one also meditates on emptiness when doing this kind of confession or purification, recognizing that the awareness of the lack having this awareness of the lack of a true identity of the mind that performed the action, or familiarity with the lack of true identity of all phenomena, that person's ethical conduct can be said to be pure. So one is able to purify or restore even the kinds of greatest transgressions through the proper kind of having regret, having this intention not to repeat that action, and also through this kind of wisdom, realizing emptiness, seeing things as not truly existent, and so forth. So here it says, then that this should be understood from the Arya Sutra on the elimination of Ajatashatru's regret. So you should overcome your regret and make special effort in meditation, recognizing the importance of this foundation of ethical conduct. So here then it continues into the sort of ways in which we eliminate the kind of attachment that is an obstacle to developing serenity. So being mindful of the various defects of attachment in this life and future lives helps eliminate misconceptions in this regard. So some common features of both beautiful and ugly things in cyclic existence are that they are all unstable and subject to disintegration. So here we need to eliminate our attachment. If we're constantly thinking like, oh, I need this thing, I need that thing, we're able to get rid of that by seeing the defects in the object, recognizing that they're not stable, that all of these things are subject to disintegration. And it is beyond doubt that you will be separated from all these things without delay. So meditate on why you should be so excessively attached to these things, and then discard all misconceptions. So it's undoubtedly the case that we will be parted from everything that we hold as being precious, that we are attached to, our body, our environment, our various possessions, and so forth. These are all things that we have to discard and leave behind. And so contemplating that, thinking about the various sort of defects of these of having attachment to these kinds of objects can help us to get rid of our attachment to them, and then in turn really put effort into virtue, to get rid of our misconceptions, and then make an effort at developing these kinds of practices. So here, this is really describing the kinds of prerequisites necessary for serenity meditation, but these are common as well for insight. So having fewer activities, feeling more satiated or content, having fewer desires, these are all important points to then be able to develop not just serenity, but also insight. And so we've gone through the kind of particular, they're really common, but particularly emphasized in the case of serenity. And then we'll move next time to the prerequisites of insight.
Oh yeah, that is oh, that is, yeah.
So we are out of time for today. So that will end it for today.
Geshe Geshe-la. And yeah, thank you, Katrina.
Oh yeah.
So we will meet each other next week, same time, 8:30 Pacific time, and we will do the dedications now.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous action spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lo Song's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayame. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzing Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends.
Oh, yeah.